Okay, let's unpack this. When you think about global wealth rankings, especially in tech, the names that jump out are almost always men. Your Bezoses, Gateses, Musks, right? But what if you slice that data differently? Look just at the women. Something, well, pretty surprising pops up.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the source material we're digging into today, it really shines a light on this, particularly when you look at self-made fortunes among women.
Self-made specifically.
Exactly. The Forbes data mentioned in the source. It's quite something. It says that out of the top 10 self-made women billionaires globally, an amazing 9 are from China or Hong Kong.
Wow. 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
That's a huge concentration from just one region.
It really is.
So, okay, our mission here in this deep dive is to get beneath that number, right? We want to understand the context, explore what factors might be contributing to their success, and also the unique challenges they faced, because it's not all smooth sailing, I assume, and maybe how they're driving innovation. We're going to try and pull out the key takeaways from this source for you.
Absolutely. And whether you're interested in, say, global business trends or how wealth gets created, or maybe you just appreciate stories about, overcoming obstacles. There's a lot here about perseverance, about ingenuity, and maybe leveraging a different kind of perspective.
Okay, so let's start with that 9 out of 10 stat. It's really striking. The source seems to suggest some of the groundwork for this might have been laid way back in China's sort of foundational principles.
That's right. Theoretically, the ideal was equality, the idea that gender discrimination just shouldn't exist. And this historical context, especially thinking back to the Mao era, it actively pushed for women's participation in the workforce, like really pushed, alongside men.
Even in tough jobs.
Sometimes, yeah, even physically demanding roles. So this
Yeah.
idea, this concept of women working, contributing economically, it's actually very deeply rooted in the culture.
Okay, so that sets a kind of stage, a baseline of theoretical equality.
Yeah.
But the source is also careful to say that the practical challenges, well, they can just disappear, right? What does it see as the big real-world hurdles?
Oh, absolutely. The ideal is one thing, but the day-to-day reality, it's definitely more complex. A major life event the source points to is childbirth.
Right.
The fact that women typically need to take several months off work, that, combined with the cultural norm, often, where the mother is the main caregiver for young kids, well, it creates practical issues in a career context.
And the source mentions this can lead to employers, maybe smaller businesses especially, seeing women as potentially higher cost, or maybe being a bit hesitant to put them in really critical roles because of potential time off.
Exactly that. And historically, this even led to things like what's called hidden marriage.
Marriage.
Yeah, where women might not actually disclose they're married early on just to try and avoid potential bias in hiring or promotions. Now, the source does say larger companies, particularly in tech, seem to be getting better, having longer-term career planning chats, trying to accommodate these things, but still a hurdle, definitely, in many areas.
Which, naturally, brings up the whole question of the gender pay gap. Does the source weigh in on whether that exists in China and how it looks?
It does, and it tries to offer a nuanced picture using data. You hear different things, right? Some say no gap, others say it's obvious. But the data presented here suggests something specific. At the lower salary levels, the ratio of men to women is apparently pretty equal, roughly 1-to-1.
Okay.
But look higher up the ladder. Top 75th percentile income, top 90th percentile. Suddenly, the proportion of men becomes way, way larger.
Interesting. So the key insight isn't necessarily about, say, a woman getting paid less than a man for the exact same entry-level job. It's more about access. Fewer women reaching those really high-paying senior leadership roles.
Precisely. The overall aggregate pay gap seems to emerge because women are just less likely to be in those top-tier, high-compensation positions. And this kind of mirrors the data on company boards that the source cites. A 2019 report found only about 10.9% female representation on listed company boards. That's quite a bit behind Europe and the US. Even in tech, it was only slightly better, around 12.5%.
But then there's this really interesting nugget in the source. In companies that are led by a woman CEO, that female board representation number apparently jumps, like dramatically, to 33.2%.
Yeah, that statistic is really powerful, isn't it?
What does that tell us?
Well, it strongly suggests that when women do manage to break through to those top leadership spots, they seem much more likely to create environments or pathways that help other women climb the ladder, too. It looks like they actively work on dismantling some of those barriers.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The source also talks about the background of dual-income households in China. That seems pretty important too, right, for setting the stage.
Oh, it's fundamental. The norm, or often the necessity, is for both spouses to work. So time. Time is just a really scarce resource in the household.
Which, as the source explains it, kind of fueled this whole externalization of domestic work. Eating out was common, sure, but then you get the widespread hiring of housekeepers and this huge explosion of services, delivery apps, cleaning platforms, grocery delivery.
Exactly. This outsourcing did two things at once. It created this massive service industry boom, and it freed up women's time and energy. It meant they could dedicate more focus to their careers instead of carrying the sole burden of housework. That seems to have been a really critical piece of the puzzle.
So, okay, despite these practical challenges, especially getting into those very top roles, we still see this incredible number of successful self-made women emerging. The source tries to identify some common qualities it observed in them. What kind of characteristics stand out?
Two things are really highlighted. The first is just remarkable tenacity, persistence.
Tenacity.
Yeah. The source shares anecdotes like wives really pushing their husbands to rebuild businesses after they failed. There's this perceived sense of just clinging on, doing whatever it takes to make something work. The source notes that culturally, perhaps, men might downplay struggles, whereas women are often described as being incredibly stubborn, really determined in their efforts.
Okay, tenacity.
Mhm.
And the second key quality mentioned.
A tendency towards deep thinking and really long-term strategic planning.
Hmm.
The source observes they often seem to be thinking years ahead, maybe even a decade.
A decade. Wow.
Yeah, and it suggests this isn't just entrepreneurs. Even women, maybe working in factories, coming from rural backgrounds, often approach their lives with this 5 or 10-year view. And this long-term perspective often translates into actions that seem very well calculated and wise.
And they leverage their unique perspectives somehow.
Crucially, yes, that shows up in different ways. Sometimes it's about starting businesses that specifically target female consumers, drawing directly on their own insights. Other times, it's maybe acting as really important strategic advisors. The source uses the term sianu to male leaders, providing that different viewpoint, maybe pointing up blind spots men might miss.
The source gives some really fascinating examples of women who seem to embody these traits and navigate this landscape. Let's maybe touch on a few, starting with Zhang Zetian, maybe better known as the milk tea sister. Her path wasn't exactly a typical founder's journey, was it? But the source presents her story as showing strength and strategic choices.
Yeah, her story's interesting. She initially got famous kind of accidentally, right, from an online photo. But instead of just leaning into being an internet celebrity, the source highlights how she deliberately focused on education, getting into a top university, and then using her platform for more, let's say, substantive things, charity work, selective TV appearances, her marriage to the founder of Jingdong, Lu Xiangdong, obviously, that came with privilege, no doubt. But the source frames it as another kind of deliberate life choice, leveraging her intelligence and platform. It sees it as embodying a sort of typical Chinese female strength and wisdom in how she handled her situation.
Okay. Then there's Lu King, daughter of the Lenovo founder, Lu Tuanzi. So an example of what they call okota, second-generation wealthy.
Yeah.
But someone who used that background and, elite education, Peking University, Harvard, Goldman Sachs, to really achieve something major on her own terms.
Right. She didn't just take an easy path. She actively sought out a really challenging role at the startup Didi, right in the middle of this brutal subsidy war they were fighting. And when Uber was planning its big aggressive entry into China, threatening both Didi and its main rival Kuaidi, the source positions Liu King as absolutely pivotal in negotiating the merger.
How so?
Well, her background made her a relatively objective third party. She had high-level connections, deep financial expertise from Goldman. This allowed her to broker what must have been an incredibly complex deal. That merger basically let Didi consolidate its power and ultimately fend off Uber's challenge. She used her resources, her background, very strategically and decisively.
And then a really powerful story of someone rising from a more, let's say, ordinary background.
Yeah.
Peng Lei from Alibaba.
Yes, Peng Lei. She started out as a university lecturer. Her husband joined Jack Ma early on, and she was initially pretty skeptical of Ma's whole vision, apparently, but she eventually became one of Alibaba's original founding members, starting on a tiny salary. What's really significant about her, according to the source, is that unlike maybe some others who might have, idolized Ma, she wasn't afraid to challenge him critically. when she thought he was wrong.
Yeah, and it was that critical perspective, that willingness to push back,
Yeah.
that led to her being put in charge of Alipay when Ma felt it wasn't doing well enough.
Exactly. Even though she wasn't, say, a tech expert or finance expert by training, she was a business expert with this incredibly deep customer-centric mindset. The source highlights how she changed Alipay's main metric, its KPI. It wasn't just about transaction volume anymore, it became transaction completion rate. That forced the whole team to simplify the user experience, like, dramatically.
How did she manage that?
Well, critically, she pushed for much simpler bank verification steps. And when the banks resisted, worried about fraud, she apparently convinced Jack Ma to agree that Alibaba itself would personally cover any losses the banks incurred due to this simplified ID check.
Wow, that's a bold move.
Huge. And it worked. It massively increased usability and was a major driver of Alipay's growth.
And she's also credited with dreaming up Yui Bell, right? That incredibly popular investment product linked to Alipay.
Yes, based on a really simple, user-focused question. Look, if Alipay is earning interest by holding onto user funds before transactions clear, why shouldn't the users themselves get that interest?
Makes sense when you put it like that.
It does, but apparently there's internal opposition. People argued it would cut into Alipay's own profits. But she pushed this customer-first principle, and it resulted in this killer product. It made investing super easy, super accessible for ordinary people, and drove massive user growth. She became known as the Financial Empress, CEO of Ant Financial. It just shows the power of that customer-first view, maybe one she had because she was slightly outside the traditional finance core within the company.
Okay, one more example. Yao Zheng, the founder of Wang Baobao Oatmeal. Her story, as the source tells it, seems to highlight a really innovative way to actually launch a product.
Yeah, what seems revolutionary there is the approach. Instead of starting with a product idea and then trying to find people to buy it, she and her co-founders apparently started by identifying a market need first.
It was.
Young women who, love to eat but are also anxious about gaining weight. They analyzed social media, looked at what this target group was actually talking about, and then they developed a product specifically for that somewhat contradictory desire. A tasty but low-sugar oatmeal.
And their marketing was different, too.
Totally broke the mold for its time, it sounds like. They went heavy on influencer marketing, Wang Hong, on social media, but not just chasing big names for broad reach. They focused intensely on conversion. They understood that sometimes smaller niche influencers actually had higher engagement, better conversion rates than huge celebrities. Their budget showed it spending twice as much on influencers as on traditional online ads.
And the content.
It was about integrating the product into lifestyle, showing its usefulness, not just blasting buy now messages. This super targeted social media native approach, really driven by understanding that specific user. It seems fundamental to how quickly they succeeded.
So we've seen quite a diverse set of stories here, leveraging privilege strategically, rising from ordinary backgrounds through sheer grit, using incredibly insightful, modern marketing. And it seems the source ties all this back to that idea about innovation coming from, well, not the mainstream.
That's a really key conclusion drawn in the source, yeah. It explicitly argues that innovation is often most powerfully driven by those who aren't at the traditional center of society or business. It points to three groups, specifically as key innovation drivers in China: students, women, and young companies that kind of keep that student-like energy hungry, experimental, not weighed down by old ways of doing things.
So the idea is that the very challenges women face, those hurdles to traditional career paths, navigating work and family, could, maybe ironically, push them to think differently.
Exactly. To find non-traditional ways to succeed, to innovate, leveraging that user-centric or maybe slightly outsider perspective that we saw in some of those examples.
Okay, let's try and bring this all together then.
Yeah.
We kicked off with that really surprising data point, the sheer number of self-made women billionaires in China. We've looked at that sort of theoretical basis of equality versus the practical challenges women still navigate, especially around childbirth and getting into those really senior roles.
Yeah, and we talked about how that cultural norm of dual income households and then outsourcing domestic tasks created this unique foundation. It enabled widespread work participation for women and fueled the rise of huge service industries.
And we clarified that nuanced picture of the gender pay gap, maybe less about unequal pay for the exact same job at entry level, and more about the disparity in accessing those top-paying, influential positions.
Right, and we highlighted those recurring qualities the source observed in successful Chinese women, that incredible tenacity, the long-term strategic thinking, and the really powerful ability to leverage their unique perspectives.
And I think a crucial takeaway, that insight from the source, Innovation often sparks not from the comfortable center, but from positions outside the traditional core, specifically naming women, students, and young, agile companies as key drivers in the Chinese context.
These stories and the data, they definitely challenge some common perceptions, don't they? About wealth, about success, and maybe where truly innovative ideas actually come from, especially when you look at different cultural and economic settings.
It really does make you think. The source discusses how those challenges women face, navigating career breaks for kids, hitting those ceilings, trying to reach the absolute highest ranks. On the surface, they look like disadvantages, right?
Clearly.
But then it suggests, maybe counterintuitively, that these very obstacles might actually cultivate resilience. They might foster that user-centric viewpoint we saw, encourage a willingness to just break the mold, try different methods.
Mm.
Could it be that the very ground where disadvantage seems to lie is also where the seeds of unique innovation, a different kind of strength, are actually sown? It makes you wonder, what challenges in your own life, or maybe in your field, could potentially be reframed? Could they be sources of a unique strength or different kind of insight you wouldn't otherwise have?